So welcome back to Managerial Accounting. And this brief little mini lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss Learning Objective 6 and Learning Objective 7 in Chapter 4. So Learning Objective 6 is using activity-based costing in services business. And then we'll get into Objective 7, which is to use activity-based costing in decision-making. So we actually started this and then we ran out of time and I had to go run to drumming. So appreciate your coming back for this little mini lecture here. So activity-based costing that we applied for manufacturers in the bulk of the chapter can also be related to service organizations such as hospitals and banks and other types of service organizations. And basically, when you do this, there are three steps. Number one, identify the activities. So these are the costs that we have relative that we want to allocate. So identify the activities. So in the case of a hospital, it may be things like radiology and X-ray radiology and feeding people and admissions and stuff like that. So identify the activities. Then determine the activity rate for each activity. So we can, in the case of admissions, it's pretty simple. It's them being admitted to the hospital. In the case of X-rays or radiology, it's the number of X-rays they get. So determine the activity rates for each activity. And we come up with what's kind of an overhead rate for each activity. And then we allocate the overhead cost based on the activity-based usage. So we'll start it with a hospital, and then in the practice exercise, we'll try it for a bank. So for a hospital here, they've already calculated for us. They took the total admission cost, they divided by the number of admissions that they estimated they were going to have for the period of time, and they came up with that rate of $180 per admission. For radiological, well, they came up with the total cost of estimated cost of X-rays divided by the number of X-rays, and they came up with that $320 per X-ray. Operating room, the total overhead cost divided by the hours in the estimated hours in the operating room, and they came up with $200 per operating room hour. Pathological testing, they took the amount they planned to spend on testing divided by the number of specimens they planned to gather. They came up with $120 per specimen. And dietary and laundry, they came up with a budget of the total diet, food and laundry total amount, and divided by the level of activity, which was the number of days, and they came up with a rate of $150 per day. So when you go to apply all these overhead costs to that poor guy lying there, he looks like he's in pain in the hospital bed, you would say, well, how many times was he admitted? How many X-rays did he have? How many hours did he spend in the operating room? How many tests did he have performed? And what was the dietary and laundry? How many days was he there? And that'll determine the dietary and laundry charges that he gets. So here's the activity. So we'll just focus in on the calculation of what we got for X-rays. So X-rays, we estimated that the total overhead was budgeted cost for $360,000. We divided by 3,000 images, and that gave us the overhead rate per day, which was $320 per image, not per day, but per image. So every time we have an X-ray, there's a charge of $320 that's allocated to him. Then to apply the activity cost to the patient, you take the activity, his or her actual usage multiplied by the activity rate. So what you can see here in the case of this particular patient, which Mia Wilson, I don't think she was the one lying in the hotel bed, in the hospital bed. Notice one admission times 180, two X-rays or radiological tests of 2 images times 320, 4 hours in the operating room, must have been a pretty big operation, so that was $800. One pathological testing, so 1 times 120, and she was in the hospital for 7 days. So that's how you get the allocation of $2,790 towards her, overhead allocated towards her. Okay, and here it is, and we compare various patients, and I think we did this in class the other day, and we saw that the hospital actually lost money on this guy, Sergei Barini, and that was likely due to the long stay that he had in the hospital. Notice the large charge he had for dietary and laundry. Okay, so that's how to use activity-based costing in a service business. Let's do a little exercise here. So I'm going to change my screen. Change my screen, and I'm going to go to this exercise, and this is exercise 6 in your text, and it's on page 177. And we're going to do this for a bank. So we're going to do activity-based costing for a bank. And what we're going to do here is we want to come up with the total administrative costs for the bank for a period of time. The bank has teller processing, it's got check processing, and it's got ATM processing. So what we want to do is we want to determine the total monthly activity-based cost for Draper Bank during the month. So actually, they made this here pretty simple for us. What you need to do is you need to figure out the total amount that they spend on teller transaction processing, the total amount on check processing, and the total amount of ATM processing. So you've got some level of activity. They gave you the rate, so we know it's $3.50 times per teller transaction. We know the check processing is 12 cents per canceled check. And we know the ATM, and this is, you can see why banks want us to use ATMs, it's much cheaper. The ATM cost here is 10 cents. So using that information, comes the total amount that the bank is going to allocate, the total cost for teller, the processing, for check processing, ATM processing. So come up with the total cost. Okay? So I want you to take a break here. So hit pause, don't jump to the answer yet, and try to figure it out yourself and spend about 5-10 minutes on that max, and then come on back for the solution. And remember, what you want to do is you want to come up with the total activity cost that we have this period based on the actual usage and based on the various overhead rates that apply to each activity. So we got a separate activity for teleprocessing, separate one for check processing, we got a separate one for ATM processing. So we have different levels of activity and we've got different rates. So combine those two together and come up with the total cost. So with that background, take your break now and come back in 5 or 10 minutes. So I wouldn't spend more than 10 minutes on here. You should be able to knock this one out in 5, but try it yourself and come back before you look at me reviewing the answer. Have fun. So you can hit pause and work this out yourself and then come on back. Well, welcome back. So this is pretty straightforward here. Our goal is to come up with the total activity cost for this service-based business for the bank. And notice what we do is these have got various levels of activity. So you get 12 teller transactions, you got 100 checks, and you've got 20 ATM processing. And here are the activity rates. So the total cost that's allocated for this bank for this period of time would be $56. So that's an example of using activity-based costing in a service business. So let's now just finish up. So we're going to use what we've learned about activity-based costing. We're going to use it in decision making here. So we can use activity-based costing to improve the cost or to control or manage the cost of our product. So for example, we've got the Lee Corporation, and they assemble LCD monitors. I guess those are video screens. And the following activity is available for a 40-inch monitor. So what we're doing here, to my good friend Amber, who asked the question about, well, are we talking about individual units? Or are we talking about the total overhead here? So here we're looking at the individual units. So for an LCD panel right now, it takes 0.8 hours in assembly, and the rate in assembly is per hour is $14. Takes 0.3 in setup, and we've got 20 hours there. Production control, we've got 0.15, and we've got 32. The rate there is 32. And the materials, the amount of time is 0.10, and it's the rate is 32, and moving is 0.4, and the activity rate is 12, and the testing is 0.25, and here is the rate per hour. So notice the amount of time it takes on each unit is it's all less than one. Some of them considerably less than one. So it's 0.8 hours in assembly, 0.3 in setup, and so forth. And these are the various activity rates. And the way they came up with these activity rates is they would have come up with the total budgeted amount and then divided by the estimated number of hours. So these are the activities. So the total activity cost allocated to each LCD monitor is $36. Right? That's what it is now. Now, they want to see if they can remove $3 worth of activity costs from the cost of the product. And they can do this in a couple of different ways. They can improve operations so that the activity-based usage per unit is either reduced or eliminated. Maybe they can change the classification of employees and therefore decrease the rate. Higher classified employees are more expensive and more skilled than the lower classified employees. All right. So assume that the process was improved so that the activity required 1/3 less time. So we cut the activity time to 1/3 less time. So whatever it was before, it's now 2/3. And the moving distance was cut in half. And would these improvements be sufficient to remove $3 activity costs from the product? Okay, so you look here in terms of the two that are highlighted here. So setup was 1/3 less time. So we reduced the setup time by 1/3, so that became 0.2. And the moving distance was cut in half. So the moving was cut in half, so it went from 0.4 to 0.2. So as a result of those two changes, reducing the amount of time in setup, reducing the time in moving, we brought the cost down to $31.60. And remember, our goal was to reduce the cost by $3. So last time we did this, we had a cost allocated per each unit of 36. And now we've got a cost of 31.6. So as a result of these two changes, we were in fact able to reduce the allocation of the overhead cost by $4.40, thereby exceeding the $3 target. Okay, so that's how to use this cost information to help reduce costs. Now, just by way of review here, so the last thing I'll say about this, so when it gets to Saturday night and you're posting the homework here, you should be able to describe 3 methods used for allocating factory overhead to products. And those 3 methods are the plant-wide rate, the production department based on multiple overhead rates for each production department, and then to use the activity-based costing. And then, so you've got individual things that we did in class which relate to each of these objectives. Those are going to be very similar to the homework exercises. You're also going to use activity-based costing to allocate selling and administrative expenses. We did that in class. You're going to use activity-based costing in a service business. We did that in class, and you'll do that in the homework. And you're going to describe and illustrate activity-based costing for use for decision-making like we just did in the last little mini lecture. Okay, so that's it. That concludes my lecture with you on Chapter 4. And I wish you well on the homework. And catch up on that homework, by the way, 25% of your grade, and you don't want to fall behind. And then on Tuesday, we'll review for the exam number 1. And on Thursday, we'll actually have exam number 1. So until next time, adios, hasta luego, au revoir. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday.